Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. It's great to have you with us. First, people across Italy have been casting their ballots today in a referendum on whether or not to support a raft of constitutional reforms championed by the Prime Minister Matteo Renzi. Well, around 50 million Italians are eligible to vote for or against those reforms, which include plans to reduce the role of the Senate and take back powers from regional authorities. Well, Renzi argues the reforms will make Italy stronger, but if the country rejects those reforms, he says he'll resign. That's a scenario which could trigger economic instability in Italy and also across Europe. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to international affairs commentator Marco Vincenzino, who joins us from New York. Thank you so much for speaking to us. A victory for Renzi would be an enormous personal triumph for him. He is, after all, the youngest ever prime minister of the country, but a no vote would be the end of his career. Do you think he's been masterful in calling this referendum or simply reckless?
The way he personalized it, he went about it wrong because he made it a personal referendum on himself. In Italy, there's an overall broad consensus, I think, that Italy needs to change. It needs to be reformed. The big debate, the great debate and the fundamental question is how to go about that reform. And obviously, the system it's seen as an attempt by an establishment to oppose that reform. And also, you have to look at the fact that Renzi himself, they see him as being motivated by self-interest, those in the opposition, and this is an attempted power grab at greater centralization. And also, there's the issue of legitimacy. He's a prime minister who was never elected to office and is not even a member of parliament. And people see that someone like that, who wasn't, coming from the outside, trying to impose such radical change, for them, it's like it lacks that legitimacy necessary. So I would say that if he does lose, it's expected that he loses the referendum, and he says that he will not partake in a technocratic government. Much of that lies in the amount of the result. If he loses by a little, if he loses by a wide margin. And then also the key players that will also be the Italian president of the republic. You would have public pressure, media pressure, political pressure. There's various key players that will determine what's the next step after a referendum if a no vote succeeds. If the yes vote succeeds, he will have defied the polls and will give him new energy. Once again, the big question is, does he have that mandate to change and impose those changes upon Italy? And today in that referendum, we'll be finding out.
Yeah, and people also saying that, the loss of international confidence in Italy and no vote would result in would mean increased borrowing costs, serious damage to the Italian economy, and also by extension to the whole of Europe, because, of course, we saw the damage that Greece did to Europe's economy, the Eurozone economy, and that's the 9th biggest economy in the bloc. We're talking here about the Eurozone's 3rd biggest economy, so potentially some huge international repercussions, economically speaking.
The economic implications, the economic fallout, and that's what the government has been playing upon. The government narrative is that if we lose this, we're in jeopardy, just not economically, but also our position within Europe. And it's a fear factor. Whether or not, if you look at, for example, you draw the parallels with the Brexit vote, is much of those who were saying we need to stay in Europe in the UK referendum were making a similar argument. Yet Brexit is yet to unfold in reality. But here, I think in Italy, mostly since they've been preparing for no vote to triumph, I think within maybe the first day or two, there'll be some repercussions on international markets. But I think the international markets will have absorbed this already, the impact, because all along the no vote has been expected to win.
Okay, and just lastly, Marco, is it possible, do you think, when looking at the profile of a typical yes voter or a typical no voter, to start drawing conclusions about them? I mean, were there divisions, do you think, in Italy along geographical lines, social class lines, socioeconomic background?
I mean, it's so far, according to the pollsters, they say obviously the opposition to it has been strongest down south and amongst the young. Those who are better off want the changes. But once again, it's important not to believe 100%. It's not black and white. A lot of times there's political undercurrents that the polls fail to spot, not just in how people feel, but even if they want to be trying to profile individuals on how they would vote. So I would say for these referendums, whether it's the Brexit referendum, the vote in the U.S., you also had the referendum on the peace process in Colombia. Attempts have been made to generalize and to label certain types of voters. But I think what's happening in recent times is that the opposition, the anti-systemic sentiment, is strong in many places, particularly in Western countries. And often these polls fail to spot these undercurrents. So I would say one needs to be very careful with polls. In the case of Italy, the anti-systemic sentiment has been brewing for a number of years, probably more than other places throughout Europe. And I would say that's very likely in the Mediterranean countries of Southern Europe, who in recent years are the one who've been suffering most from the crisis plaguing Europe. And then also you have to take into account the immigration situation in Italy. So if you take all these factors into consideration, I would say that Italy is representative more, obviously, of the Southern European countries. And you see dynamics at play in different European countries. In France and Spain. In Spain, a government won 2 elections, but in inconclusive, it's ruling as a minority.
Okay.
In France, we see a president who's basically not going to be running again. So the dynamics at play in Europe, it's important not to generalize populism as black and white. There's a lot of dynamics at play in different countries.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. International affairs commentator Marco Vincenzino in New York. Thank you very much again.